Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. There's more information on our website, womensdeclaration.com, where you will find our declaration on women's sex-based rights, which has been signed by 35,645 people from 160 countries and is supported by 105 organisations from all over the world. We have over 100 volunteer activists, including 53 country contacts, engaged in defending women's rights, and we'd be really pleased for you to join us as a volunteer if you'd like to. Today, we have Karen Smith from Australia. She's going to talk, the title of her talk is Going Guerrilla, Practivism and Getting It Done. Then we're going to hear from Heather Binning, who is from Women's Rights, the founder of Women's Rights Network from the UK. She's going to talk about the new report, when we are at our most vulnerable. And she'll also talk a bit about the Women's Rights Network. Then we're going to hear from Fabiola from Venezuela. And there's a video clip that we're going to play that she's made, and it's entitled Silence Around the Deaths of Women and Children in Venezuela. And then we are going to have Sally Wood from England, who is going to talk on restoring patient-centredness in the NHS, that's the National Health Service, same-sex accommodation and same-sex care. We're going to start, first of all, with Karen Smith from Australia. Karen is a member of the Women's Action Alliance Canberra, a women's liberation group committed to the protection and advancement of women and girls on the understanding that sex is a biological fact with material consequences for females living under patriarchy. The title of Karen's talk is Going Guerrilla, Practivism and Getting It Done.
My name's Karen Smith. I'm a representative of the Women's Action Alliance Canberra. Our motto there, as you can see, is getting it done. I'm going to give you a bit of an update on some of our activities. Women's Action Alliance Canberra comes out to WAAC, W-A-A-C, so we call them WAACtivities. Canberra, of course, is the capital of Australia. We're the Australian Capital Territory, ACT. So in terms of our WAACtivities or activities, I'll give you some updates on a couple of protests that we've been doing, some activism tips for the new ones, and some guerrilla activism that we've noticed around town. Not stuff that we've necessarily been involved in or we haven't been involved in ourselves, but just stuff that we're seeing other women doing. So I'm going to start with our ABC protest. ABC is the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. It's the equivalent of the BBC and other government-sponsored media. And we conducted what we called our ABC Tavistock and Media Watch protest. And this was a protest about the ABC's non-reporting of Tavistock. We conducted it late last year, middle of last year in August. And Media Watch is, it's a program that kind of holds our media to account. And they ran a segment on how the ABC didn't report Tavistock. And the ABC is, if possible, even more captured than the BBC. The BBC, of course, is walking back, being captured, but the ABC is still going full on. So we decided to have a bit of a protest off the back of the Media Watch segment on the ABC's non-reporting of Tavistock. Helpfully, the ABC in Canberra, where we're based, is at an intersection on a main drag, on a main road. We set up there on a Saturday morning from about 11 a.m. This is us just starting to get ready. We mostly protested on public land. You can see the intersection here, so we were able to capture a fair bit of traffic. We were mostly on public land. We had occasional incursions onto ABC property. Here we are on ABC property. I don't think they would have come out and moved us on. We weren't there for long. But we took a variety of signs. As you can see, we spent almost 2 hours there. We, as the traffic was going past, people were reading the placards from their cars. We got lots of honks of support, lots of thumbs up. So that's how we measure support. We got abuse from only 3 or 4 cars, I'd suggest, all with young people telling us to fuck off. We had some passers-by, they stopped to talk, but this isn't really a main thoroughfare at the ABC. Our main idea was just to take our placards and get some visibility. Some sisters in our group aren't comfortable with going public, so they wear face masks, hats, sunglasses, coats, things like that. At one point, an ABC employee actually came and spoke to us, which is rather unusual because they don't tend to talk to women about what's going on in this area. So they took some photos, they gathered intel on us, we gave them handouts. Here's our ABC employee there, nicely ringed out. We did mention to the ABC employee the ABC's editorial policies 2 and 4, which deal with reporting facts and being impartial. And the ABC employee said, I report the facts and I'm impartial, as are my colleagues. That's the only comment I'll give. So that was a little bit weird, but anyway, she had her say. This is us just finishing up at the very front of the ABC. So good photo ops, that's one of the main things that we do these wactions for, is for photo ops. We can tweet them and put them on our blog. This is us finishing up, but this is us at the end with our little Lego sisters. Sorry, I'm from South Australia where we say Lego, which is a genuine linguistic inflection instead of Lego. So these are our little Lego sisters. And some of our sisters, like I say, who aren't that comfortable with getting their face out there, just feel more comfortable having their Lego mini-me's represent them. So that was our ABC Tavistock protest. We gained a fair amount of support for that. Our next protest that I'll talk about is from the ACT Magistrates Court. There we go. That's the posse with our signs. We set up there in September on a public holiday last year. Again, we weren't aiming for foot traffic. We were really aiming just to get photos and to do some awareness raising via Twitter and our blog. Because we went on a public holiday, so this is kind of a good tip as well. Because we went on a public holiday, it also meant that we didn't have to advise the sheriff that we were outside. Because you can only protest in certain places around courts, and you certainly can't protest outside the family court or the children's court. So yes, we can see that we made our own placards there, which is quite a relaxing activity, good mindfulness activity, if you like. Some of us had been watching Rumpole the night before, so we had some Rumpole themed the scales of justice favour men kind of themes there. We plead for women, acquit your duty, protect women. So the purpose of this protest was we were questioning the court's reasoning on a decision, because the court released on bail a 27-year-old male who was charged with 72 offences related to child sexual assault. He's a trans-identified male. He's alleged to have sexually abused his 2 younger sisters, who were between 5 and 12 years old at the time, over a period of 7 years. He pleaded not guilty to all charges, and those charges included incest, assault, choking, sexual assault, acts of indecency. We came across it because he was reportedly granted bail in a hearing in the ACT, that's the Australian Capital Territory, in the ACT Children's Court. He was granted bail due to concerns that he'd be remanded in the male section of the local correctional centre. So the concerns were that the male would be remanded in the male section of the correctional centre in the ACT. I've got written here, presiding magistrate Jane Campbell determined that detaining the defendant in the male section of the correctional centre would be unsuitable given he identifies as a woman. And she stated this: "To my grand astonishment, I am told she," the male, "to my grand astonishment, I am told she would be held in the male section of the AMC," that's the Alexander McConaughey Centre, the correctional centre, "that she would be held in the male section of the AMC, and that would clearly not be in the interests of a person who identifies as a woman." So, well, we were grandly fucking astonished too, because this, we felt, could have been a dire forewarning or a precedent of the position that the court might take in future in relation to any male that says that he's a woman. And that is that such men should not be housed in a men's facility. Okay, great. But we were grandly astonished to think that this could possibly lead to a man's being housed with women if found guilty. So that's what we were protesting. Oh, there's some of our placards, lovely Rumpole-inspired placards. "Don't lower the bar for men. Caution judge, women object." All right, so here's some protest photos. We have a men's auxiliary. Throughout history, there have been women's auxiliaries, right? So WAC has a men's auxiliary, the WACMA. They were invited. They're only ever invited if they're going to be useful. So that means taking photos, holding placards, sticking their legs under placards. If any sister in our group doesn't want a man there, then he's removed. No questions, no argument, no judgment. All our after events are for sisters only. So we went for lunch after that. But here, again, it was just a bit of a photo op out front of the courts. Again, this is all good Twitter fodder, we felt. We read out some telegrams, i.e. texts that we'd received, texts or telegrams of support from Kit Kowalski, Janet Fraser, Isla McGregor, all big names in the gender critical space in Australia. Single-sex prisons WA, we gave some speeches. Here's a sister reading out a speech on behalf of Jess Williams, the founder of Single-Sex Prisons WA and indeed Single-Sex Prisons Australia. So there we are, doing our thing out front of the Magistrates Court. We got a lot of likes and some good publicity through that waction. Another waction we did was our Get Gender Out of Schools banner drop. This is us. We organised this one fairly quickly. We just needed to scratch an itch, really. We're all getting a little bit over it. So we decided to set up over, on a walkway over a busy road on a Friday afternoon to capture peak hour traffic. Yes, here's a picture of a fence, it looks like, but actually this is just to demonstrate the importance of recceing the site. So we found a site that was pretty hard to get to by car. We had to recce it because we somehow had to get banners dropped around these kinds of structures. We did a practice run on the banner drop just for safety. You don't want to, this is on our recce too. We just happened to see a sign there about the Australian National University, which is also tremendously captured, that someone had done a number on the roadside sign. So the things you see when you're out and about, getting ready for a banner drop. So yeah, we of course, when we do a banner drop and we do our practice, we don't want to drop banners over traffic. We aimed for a quick and clean setup and knockdown. We only had 2 main banners and our themes were children and schools. At the end of the action, nothing was left behind, but it also gave us a nice effect, we think a nice effective kind of visual. Hopefully this video will play. But you can see it on our Twitter feed. It's up the top as a pinned tweet. So that's our Get Gender Out of Schools. Here's another one of the banners that we put up. No child is born in the wrong body. So really simple, direct, clear messaging. We've also got some of our WAC banners up there. So we need to keep everything safe and legal because our name is out there as well. Just another view. We had, again, a good amount of traffic go past. put this one up here because we thought on the footbridge we might capture a bit of foot traffic, and we put up these, some of our placards just behind the "No Child is Born in the Wrong Body" banner. The problem, of course, is when you see it from the other side, is that all the placards, the silhouette of the placards is visible through the banner. So that was a bit of a mistake there. I mean, people still could read the banners because we know that, because we keep a tally of reactions. And here we had 51 positive reactions and only 7 negative reactions. So we see that as a straw poll of Canberra's feelings about gender in schools. So always a good idea. That runs out at about 13.5 or 7% or something. We also did a banner drop for International Women's Day this year. Again, we aimed to capture morning traffic. And again, we just stuck with a really simple theme: women and sport. And the same with the Get Gender Out of Schools banner drop. 2 simple messages that people can put together so that the messages together make sense. You don't want to confuse people with abstruse slogans, stuff that we might understand, but that they might not quite grab a hold of. So we're choosing something that people can understand and connect with instantly. We were quite surprised at how many people actually seem to understand this message: woman is not an identity. Maybe that was also because there's some of the traffic, but maybe that's also because we put up another banner, which was no balls in women's sport. And as you can see on the bottom of the banner there, we have some tennis balls. So putting those 2 messages together, a lot of people seem to understand what the message was. Again, we took a straw poll of reactions. There was a pretty, of the negative reactions, there was a pretty even split. Here we go. So we had 81 positive reactions and 11 negative by our count. So positive, again, a thumbs up and honks and waves. Negative reactions are the fingers and the, abuse. And for the negative reactions, what was interesting about this one, with the Get Gender Out of Schools, the negative reactions all seem to be from people who understood the gender issue on the trans side. With the International Women's Day negative reactions, there seemed to be a bit of an even split between the anti-woman trans activists and your good old-fashioned garden variety misogynistic tradie in a fluoro and a ute. So it's a tradesperson in a fluoro vest in a car with a tray in it. So that was interesting. All of the abusers took time to roll down their windows, scream at us, flip the bird. But what we found particularly interesting about this was exactly the same percentage of positive versus negative reactions, 13.5, 13.7, whatever percent. So, we figured this really could be what Canberra thinks about genderism. We've got some details at the end of our website and how to find it. We've got a blog post up there on how to do such a banner drop, choosing a location, finding something that's safe and suitable, doing a recce, how to get your messaging clear, making an effective banner, what materials to use or avoid, briefings, debriefings, practice drops, risk management, staying observant and safe, that sort of thing. So there are just a few of our wactions, but we've also noticed a few other things around Canberra that we haven't been doing, but it's been good to see. WAC operates only as a group. So the Women's Action Alliance Canberra, we operate only as a group. As such, we do not condone the breaking of any laws in any jurisdiction. This is very important to us because we aim to be seen as a serious, sensible organisation with good standing that uses fact and evidence, reason, rationality, courtesy, compassion. These are all watchwords for us. These are things that we use to make our case. So we avoid anything that's illegal. But we do know that there are other women active around Canberra and surrounds, because Canberra's kind of stuck in the middle of New South Wales. So there are other regions around Canberra where sisters, live and observe. So for those women who are conducting such such actions, and we'd advise that they need to know what their individual laws are in their jurisdictions. In particular, they need to know their vandalism and littering laws. So, for example, in the ACT, there's a difference between the ACT and New South Wales. In the ACT, you absolutely cannot chalk or sticker. You cannot put any temporary structures. You can only put temporary structures up that can be removed. Again, you cannot chalk in the ACT because that attracts an $11,100 fine and or 6 months imprisonment. Compare that to New South Wales, where chalking, for example, you can leave items that can be removed by soap and water, and that will only attract a $400 fine. So again, chalking is absolutely not okay. In the ACT, cargo pants might be useful if sisters wanted to do that kind of thing, but again, not wax sisters, absolutely not. Other things that you can't do, for example, in the ACT, are to leave leaflets under windscreen wipers. That's the case in most jurisdictions in Australia. You can't leave loosies in, for example, I don't know, notebooks at stationery shops, or inside free event magazines, or kids' book catalogues, or inside pamphlets at doctors' surgeries. You can't do that. That's all littering. Can't do it at things like secondhand book fairs. You can't pop them in secondhand books. Can't leave menus, loosies in coffee club menus or anything like that. But based on some of the items we've seen around town in Canberra, we assume that it might be easier than some imagine to do that. Then again, we also wonder if, if we're seeing it, and people might notice that people are actually doing it, but not say anything when they see them do it at the time. We're just not sure how that might work. We also, again, being a little careful at WAC, we also wonder if someone notices and says, you shouldn't be doing that. What might be a good approach, which might be, oh, okay, I'll stop doing it then, and then really quietly stop doing it and just move on. So that sort of thing, we guess, would apply to stickering. Again, we've decided not to do that sort of thing because it's illegal in the ACT. But based on observations, we've noticed that some stickers get taken down fairly quickly, others can last weeks. Some, if they're placed in toilets, or places where there's anti-graffiti paint, they can probably get taken down pretty quickly by cleaners or whomever. But yes, some things might just leave a different kind of surface. If one sticker got taken off, it might leave a different kind of surface for something else to happen on. Also in WAC, we don't encourage sisters to put things on sliding doors because they can be, pretty dangerous and quick to slide on top of you. Other people's posters also is probably something you want to be careful about, or other groups that might be have things on their website that are quite anti-woman. You might want to also, in WAC, we wouldn't want to prevent other people from speaking. Absolutely not. Sometimes there might be a case for joint messaging. We also figure it's probably easier to place items in places where you are meant to be standing still already. So that might mean, I don't know, men's loos, perhaps parking machines. We've seen them on parking machines. Probably other places where you're meant to be standing still could be places like post boxes or phone kiosks. You might see people standing still at hand sanitizer stations. On obviously, if people are hanging around with shopping baskets or in the shops. Maybe gender clinics or cosmetics clinics. There might also be mobile marketing you can see around town as well. As a thought experiment in WAC, one of the reasons we've decided not to do this sort of thing is because we just assume that everyone's being watched on CCTV. You know, we've also got a place that we've seen a few sisters, well, not our sisters, but a few of our non-WAC sisters have been placing things in particularly captured areas around town. We've also, it's a bit of a shame that WAC doesn't do anything like this, because you'd think that Canberra would be a pretty good spot for, you know, getting some stickers or things out there, but it's just not worth our while to do that on government property, or even with, you know, big business, just not worth our while, or to walk into lobbies and do it in force and things like that. Oh yes, regional Australia is not immune either, just get that out there. These are some of the resources available on our website. Again, I'll pop a slide up directly. So these are the sorts of things that we provide for sisters' personal use and for no other reasons there. Also some handouts and things like that. If I can, I would like to take this opportunity to, as we finish up, just to launch globally the affiliation of Australian Women's Action Alliances. We encourage sisters to form groups. WAC is a model. Our model is to be seen as a serious group with good standing. We write submissions, we write letters, have meetings with politicians. We now have 3 Women's Action Alliances. So I'm pleased to announce tonight that we have affiliated to become the affiliation of Australian Women's Action Alliances. That's AWA. We have the Women's Action Alliance Canberra, the Women's Action Alliance Tasmania, and the Queensland Women's Action Alliance. If any sisters in Australia are interested in our model, please get in touch. We're the Women's Action Alliance Canberra. We are a member of AWA, the affiliation of Australian Women's Action Alliances. Our motto is let's get it done. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm really pleased to introduce Heather Binning. She's the founder of Women's Rights Network, which is a rapidly growing grassroots network of women from England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and whose primary focus is to defend the sex-based rights of women. She's talking about the report, When We Are at Our Most Vulnerable, the Sickening Extent of Rapes and Sexual Assaults in Hospitals. Thank you so much, Heather, for coming on, and over to you.
In England, but Women's Rights Network that I founded is UK based, so it's all 4 nations. We have about 2,000 women across the UK in our network, in local groups. And we also now have a Women's Rights Network in Canada and a Women's Rights Network in Australia. I'm going to be coming back on in a couple of weeks to talk about that and some other things. So meanwhile, you can Google or do a Twitter search on those 2 organizations if you want to know more. Anyway, I'm here to talk about the report, When We Are at Our Most Vulnerable, that I'm pretty sure most people caught up in this ideology in the UK will know about. I'm not so sure whether any overseas viewers will know about it, but what happened, and it's had significant impact. So what happened was that one of our groups, or local groups, did a freedom of information request of the police in their county, and said how many rapes and sexual assaults have there been in hospitals within their area. And the numbers that came back were absolutely astonishing. It was you couldn't believe this. Something wrong there? Is this indicative of what's happening across the country? So we thought, let's do a big project on it, and let's do freedom of information requests to all police forces. And there's 43 police forces. So we did. That's taken a long time. A small team working on it, solidly, chasing up, pulling numbers together, getting responses, going back. It's not an easy thing. It's not, you send off submit a form and then you get an answer back. So there's a lot more toing and froing and that. And the way our network is set up, we bunch together people that work in particular sectors, as well as having a geographical locations. So for instance, teachers or people that have got specific interests in sports or knowledge on the sports, and they work up sort of campaign projects. So we've got an academics group, and went into the academics group and say, listen, we're gathering all this information. It looks pretty horrendous. Is anybody here would like to take it on, write a report? And Professor Jo Phoenix, who some of you may know from, she was Open University. She's now pursuing a court case with them for, I can't remember the exact terms, but dismissal for harassment, basically. And so she's a professor in criminology. She's now at Reading University. And so she said, yeah, she'd take it on. Perfect person for this, perfect background and knowledge for putting this report together. So report came, working on it for months. And the results are 6,500 rapes and sexual assaults across the UK in hospitals. Now, this is private and NHS. 2,000 of those numbers were rapes. 1,000 of those numbers, we don't know how many rapes, how many sexual assaults, were actually on hospital wards. And we presume when we say wards, we're talking about inpatients here. That is actually 35 of the police forces that responded to us. The 43 police forces, only 35. Not that they didn't respond, but they found some way not to provide us with the information. Usually reasons that fundamentally come down to cost. And they're allowed to, if it goes over, the costs are estimated to be over £600, you're allowed to refuse a freedom of information request. So the data was difficult to match up because they're all, recording them in different ways. But we did our best. One force, at least one force we know of, because they were upfront about it, say they didn't include any data with numbers less than 5. So we had to count 0 because we didn't. It could be 4, could be 3, could be. So we could count 0 for that. Of course, we've got the missing police forces, and we've got knowledge that universally these crimes go unreported predominantly. So we can estimate, we can have a good guess that the real numbers of people that suffer, and predominantly women, we're talking in the 90+%, of course, of these crimes committed by men against women. And they're just, there's 3 incidences of gang rape, 2 on a female, 1 on a male. 9, we know of 9 children. Now, this is where forces have given us those sorts of information. So there's a lot more unpicking that can be done and will be done. We'll go on to pursue some of this stuff. So the numbers themselves are horrendous enough. 4% resulted in a summons or charge. Now, that's not an outcome of conviction. That is just means it's moved to the next level. And it goes from reporting, you report something to the police, they don't necessarily record it for action for a variety of reasons. It's mainly about manipulating data as far as I can see it. Once it's recorded, it then couldn't end up after investigation, end up in charge or summons. It then goes to the CPS. It then goes to the court, possibly. And all these different stages, there's a dropout of. So you end up getting very, very low numbers from original starting point. Now, we know this is true of rapes and sexual assaults across the board. This is not just in hospitals. This is just standard for rapes and sexual assaults. But what you've got to ask the questions, given that, hospitals have got CCTV, where's the evidence? What investigation is being done on this? So lots and lots of questions coming out of these statistics. So we have called, as a result of it, we have called for better recording. Who are the victims? Are the patients? They're not all. I'm pretty sure they cannot all be patients. So staff, who are the alleged perpetrators? Are they also staff, or are people just walking in off the street? Oh, I doubt that. That's a bit of a tough question. That I shouldn't think that. It's not opportunistic, and there's not We're not too far away from Jimmy Savile. Everybody, didn't we think that was maybe Jimmy Savile was one of those who aren't in the UK might want to Google that particular perpetrator. But it was fundamentally in hospitals and taking advantage of people, of vulnerable people. So better recording in order that those that have the power to do something about this and introduce proper safeguarding, there needs to be a better interrogation of the data, and that's going to involve the police in a lot of looking again at the. I have no doubt that they know the information, but it's just they can't do a very quick search on the records they have to get the information out. So there's going to be, we're going to be calling on all police forces to be undertaking that work and looking so that we can get better understanding of exactly who, where, why, what these crimes are carrying out. And all the guidance we seem to have that the hospitals, private and NHS, have to answer to. The policies promote something called sexual safety and well-being. Rather than safeguarding, they don't seem to be, exploring the same-sex ward issue. And is this making people more vulnerable? Is there a big safeguarding requirement? We know that in 2010, the then Secretary of State for Health, forgive me, I can't remember his name right now. There was documents produced saying we're absolutely committed to same-sex accommodation for people in wards. Women should not have to pass by a man on their way from their bed to the toilet. And it went on in some detail about the reasons why privacy, dignity and security, same-sex wards had to be in place across. And here was the government, 2010, government commitment to this happening. However, there was an Annex B to that document, and that Annex B said that if somebody came along and identified the gender different to their birth sex, then they were to be accommodated in the appropriate ward. Now, with the increase, and that kind of went unnoticed, I think, for a long time, maybe Sally will know better, but with the increase in people self-identifying, that's clearly making a nonsense of the policy that says you have to have same-sex accommodation. So that's one of the things we will be calling for. We're not at the moment focusing completely on that, because I don't want to detract from the main issue, which is that women, predominantly women, are not safe in hospitals, whether they work there or whether they're in bed there or whether they're visiting for to get their corns removed or whatever. We don't know. And that is fundamentally the issue. And I don't want that sidelined, although that's the Annex B is a very, very significant part of that. Now, we've got a fabulous podcast, which is an interview with Joe, who wrote the report, Joe Phoenix. So you go onto your podcast and look for Women's Rights Network, it'll come up, and you'll see it was only last week, I think it was launched. Or you could go onto our website and you can look at our media channels. I think it's got podcasts there. It is a really, really good listen. And she goes into quite a lot more detail than I'm able to in this short segment about the report. And she's the author, and she's professor of criminology. She's great. So it's a good listen. I'm absolutely astonished at the response our report has had. We're not the first to have raised this as an issue. It's not, I can't say it's not been a secret, but others have raised it before. However, we released it on a Monday. On a Wednesday, there was a question in the House of Commons, in Parliament, to the Prime Minister about our report. On Friday, the Health Secretary convened a meeting of senior officials in the health service to discuss what they were going to do about this. Within 4 days, we had achieved significant action. Now, our job is going to be keeping on top of that, making sure action is indeed what happens. We can't, I would hesitate can introduce knee-jerk reactions, such as there's been a lot of talk about body cams. There needs to be a proper understanding of where is the problem that we need to fix. You know, same-sex wards, that could be a very quick one. We don't know how much of that they will fix. The issue with perhaps mental health patients, because of lack of funding and the closure of other mental health facilities. Mental health, or old people, demented people are in hospital for longer than they should be. Is that part of the problem? But without interrogating these incidents a lot more, it's finger in the air stuff. So we will be pushing our local groups will be pushing their police forces and their hospitals. We already have a couple of meetings arranged with a couple of police forces. Won't say anymore, don't want to disrupt any potential there. We've got a couple of meetings with hospitals. We've achieved that. We're encouraging all our women to be raising this with their MPs. MPs need to know about it. And particularly in light of any discussions, parliamentary discussions we do get on Annex B, this will be a fundamental document. Our report will be fundamental to hopefully any changes that come about there. So that's all I have to say. I said briefly at the start that I'll be back in a couple of weeks to talk to you about Global Women's Day, which will be on the weekend of the 7th, 8th of July. Some of you on here already know about that. So I'll come back and talk about that. And any questions, I'll talk about Women's Rights Network Canada and Australia and any other countries that join us by then.
We're now going to hear from Sally Wood, who's from England. And Sally Wood is a therapist working with brain injury survivors. She wishes to see the protection of the same-sex accommodation and the same-sex care on request. And her talk today is called Restoring Patient-Centredness in the NHS National Health Service, same-sex accommodation and same-sex care. So thank you so much, Sally, for coming and speaking to us. And it's really goes very well with the other talks we've had. So over to you.
It's my privilege to work with people after brain or spinal injury or illness in hospital. We're a multidisciplinary team of professionals accompanying each person on a precarious journey to an uncertain outcome. And we must ensure that they're in skillful, dedicated, and knowledgeable hands. Over the last 26 years in the NHS, I have absorbed the values and practices of an evolving and improving self-reflective health service, nonetheless knowing that at times we fail terribly. I have experienced the visceral shock of learning about scandals, for example, the mid-staff scandals, Winterbourne View, Walton Hall, Edenfield. When this word scandal is used, we have at least the feeling of relief that exposure has come, the judgment made, staff suspended, practices stopped, and patients safeguarded. But there have been 3 more shocks that I have experienced during the last year, and there is no such relief. The first shock was delivered in March last year. Until then, I had only had experience of our wholehearted commitment to safeguarding, patient-centred care, and evidence-based practice. Baroness Nicholson made a speech in the House of Lords, which she posted on Twitter about something I had never heard of, Annex B. It is an appendix to one of our most robust and successful safeguarding policies, delivering same-sex accommodation. This wonderful policy emerged in 2010, and it evolved from 5 decades of experience of mixed-sex accommodation in hospitals, when it was observed that women were at particular risk of sexual exploitation and physical and sexual abuse. This happened as a direct result of mixing sex. So the purpose of this policy is the protection of the privacy and dignity of men and women and the sexual safety of women in healthcare settings. It worked because there was universal support and there was a punishment for failure. We had to record any mixed sex breaches and we were fined a significant sum for each one. So it worked. I could see that the development of gender ideology was eroding rights to same-sex spaces throughout society for women and girls, but I believe that this policy, delivering same-sex accommodation, protected our patients against such erosion within the NHS. Yet unknown to Parliament or clinical staff, Annex B had been slipped into page 12. It completely disabled the main policy. It instructs us to suspend reality, dismiss the large body of evidence that goes before it, and exempts men and women who believe that they have a gender identity, which is at variance with their sex. Therefore, they identify as transgender. As we know, the trans umbrella is very wide, including not only those who propose to reassign their sex, a protected category under the Equality Act, but also those who self-identify as non-binary or gender fluid, or they might just cross-dress sometimes, or they might adopt one of many gender identities beyond male and female. This has far greater implications for women and girls. All men who state that they identify into a gender identity other than male must be given the choice of women's wards. They don't even have to say that they are trans women. Women's wards have now become gender neutralized by policy. I shall read from it. Transgender, or trans, is a broad, inclusive term referring to anyone whose personal experience of gender extends beyond the typical experiences of their assigned sex at birth. It includes those who identify as non-binary. A trans person does not need to have had or be planning any medical gender reassignment. It is enough that they are undergoing a personal process of changing gender. In addition, good practice requires that clinical responses be patient-centered, respectful and flexible towards all transgender people, whether they live continuously or temporarily in a gender role that doesn't conform to their natal sex. So generally, trans people should be accommodated according to their presentation, the way they dress, and the name and pronouns they currently use. This may not always accord with the physical sex appearance of their chest or genitalia. Now, if admission staff, it says, are unsure of a person's gender, they should ask discreetly where the person would most comfortably be accommodated. They should then comply with the patient's preference immediately or as soon as practicable. If the patient is unconscious, inferences should be drawn from their presentation or mode of dress. That's bad luck for any of us who like to wear jeans and a hoodie and have short hair. And non-binary individuals, it emphasizes who don't identify as being male or female should also be asked discreetly about their preferences and allocated to the male or female ward according to their choice. So the ideological language in this document, for example, it refers to people who, for example, trans women who usually wear wigs and are unable to, when they are admitted to hospital, they may be, for example, read incorrectly as men, and extra care must be given to them so that their privacy and dignity as women are appropriately ensured. Now, this makes absolutely no sense to any clinician. It shows that an ideologue has written this policy. And the language contrasts with any other health policy. It tells us to disbelieve that men with a male physical appearance are men. They must be afforded extra care. It suggests, furthermore, that curtains and side rooms can be used to separate those who are very physically different from the sex that they are identifying as. This suggestion hasn't come from any clinician with experience of working on wards, because side rooms are to be allocated for those in clinical need for isolation. For example, if they are immune suppressed or if they are infectious to others. And curtains are a ridiculous and dangerous suggestion. Patients in hospital must be observable to staff, because behind a curtain, they can deteriorate or they can fall out of sight. They don't offer true privacy, and in fact, can protect the privacy of an abuser. And this happened on a ward in Ireland. A multiply injured girl of 17 was accommodated with 3 men, and the curtains were drawn around her. She couldn't use the call bell because of her injuries. Overnight, she was sexually abused, and that curtain provided privacy to the predator. She wanted to leave hospital immediately, of course, and such policies will lead to women self-excluding. So in all, NHS England is instructing its staff to ignore its own policy, its own evidence, to accommodate men alongside women against those women's informed consent. We are expected to believe that the physical reality of sex is superseded by a feeling of gender, that sex no longer exists as a reality or a risk. Why? Who decided that gender was more important than sex? In Annex B, the word woman, her needs, her consent, her wishes evaporate. Women have become furniture, inanimate accessories to the female environment requested by a trans-identified man. Now, some trusts did consider women. What if they stop behaving as obediently as furniture and they express an objection? NHS Glasgow and Clyde and NHS Arran and Ayrshire in Scotland develop training for staff in the face of such vocal women. They instruct them to, number one, lie. I quote, reiterate that this is indeed a female ward, that there are no men present. Number two, threaten to disrupt her care. The woman may be moved. Number three, shame her. So the staff are instructed to tell the woman that this is harassment, like racism and homophobia. As E.D. Wyatt wrote last year, the use of shame to erode women's boundaries is rape culture. The words transphobe is just another shame word to erode women's sexual boundaries and give males access to vulnerable women. But we staff can't legitimately comply with Annex B for several reasons. One is the law. The Health and Care Act 2022 prevents us. In 2015, the excoriating evidence from the Francis inquiry into the mid-staff scandal of neglect led to the introduction of new fundamental standards. And these standards uphold quality, safety, and honesty, below which your care must never fall. If we fail, regulatory action by the CQC or prosecution could result. And they include person-centered care. You must have care or treatment that is tailored to you and meets your needs and preferences. Well, I prefer a same-sex ward. And the next one, dignity and respect. You must be treated with dignity and respect at all times, and this includes making sure that you have privacy when you need and want it. Another fundamental standard is consent, which is self-explanatory. Other standards which are relevant here are safety of treatment, safeguarding from abuse, and the duty of candor, which means that if there is a problem, a complaint, a failure, we must investigate it, or we must investigate it with honesty. So imagine a situation where there has been an assault or a loss of privacy or dignity. How can the staff investigate a problem that they're being told is not a problem, that there are no men here? Another standard is staffing, and we are required to have enough staff and for those staff to be appropriately trained to be suitable for that job role. So it cannot be possible that we can ever say that there are not enough women to provide same-sex care, which we will go to later. Now, so the NHS England's policy is ordering us to ignore the standards that were written especially for us after one of the worst NHS scandals in history. Another very important law is the Mental Capacity Act that was written in 2005. It immediately moves to give extra protection to patients who lack the capacity to make their own decisions. We, the team, have to ensure that each decision that we make on their behalf is truly in their best interests, based on the evidence available at the time and based on what we know of the patient's wishes. A best interest assessor will be scrutinising our care and decision making, and if we fail in our duty, we will be referred to the judgment of the Court of Protection. This is very serious. So a decision to bring a man into a female bay with 3 other women is not a best interest decision. And it could not be defended in court. It is quite the opposite. It immediately causes a loss of privacy and dignity, and it raises the risk of sexual offences against her. So this means that the bay must be preserved as same sex, because at any time, any one of those 3 women might lose capacity, or such a non-capacitous woman may be admitted into an empty bed. Now, what about sexual safety in hospitals? This is the reason for the same-sex wards policy. In 2018, the CQC confirmed over a 3-month period in psychiatric wards that 1,120 unwanted sexual incidents occurred over 3 months. And the FOIs that we've seen show that this problem is far greater in mental health units. One casualty is this young woman, Gaia Pope. So Gaia was raped at the age of 16, developed mental health difficulties. She was admitted to a mental health ward, I think at the age of 18 or 19. And she was sexually abused. It was a mixed sex psychiatric ward. She complained, but nothing was done. Now, she was discharged into the community without any safeguarding. And she was not well. She became more unwell, and she suffered a crisis. She went missing, and her family searched for her. The police were not as supportive as they could have been, and the family found Gaia having died of exposure in a field. Now, I feel that this is an extremely important story because she was initially, at the age of 16, she was raped, and the investigation failed. They knew who the assailant was, but he was not convicted. He was convicted later for similar offences, but not for the one against her. And when she was brought into hospital, she should have been safeguarded. And had she been treated with patient-centred care, she would not have been placed on a mixed-sex ward, and her complaint would not have been ignored. The assailants tend to be male patients against female in psychiatric units, but in physical medicine, like in my hospital, assailants are almost always staff. This was confirmed to me by our head of safeguarding. I hope to find more information about these assaults and rapes in my hospital. I want to find out more how and when they happened. The charge rate is incredibly low, lower than the national average. As Heather told us, the WRN have recently republished that report showing a high prevalence of rapes and sexual assaults. And just for one example, to take one county, across all the hospital sites in Surrey, over 3.5 years, there have been 158 sexual assaults reported to police, of which 41 are rape. No charges were brought for the rapes, only 3 charges for sexual assault. Gender identity is not relevant at all. It is the male sex that is the risk, because rape can only be committed by a penis. So how can we deal with this in hospital if we are pretending men are not men? Well, we have to be trained in irrational decision-making to relegate safeguarding to second place. Nottinghamshire Healthcare NHS Trust, who are a Stonewall star performer, train their staff to override their knowledge of reality and duty to safeguard. They say to nurses, bear in mind that you would be in more trouble for denying someone their human rights when it comes to admitting a man to a female ward. But it isn't a human right for a man to share a ward with women. The human rights at stake are those for women to be protected from cruel and degrading treatment and torture, which is what can be imposed upon them in the form of sexual assault, indecent exposure, voyeurism, and loss of privacy. What do they say about sex offenders? Well, they're not a big worry. If a female who was once a male, I'm quoting here, if a female who was once a male with a history of sexual assaults on women needed admission to a female ward, she should be treated as any other patient and a thorough risk assessment carried out. But nurses are not probation officers. They won't have access to criminal records and can't possibly be expected to assess that risk. But if women are harmed, the inference is that it will of course be those nurses' fault for not fulfilling the word thorough and in succumbing to this heavy pressure to favour admission. North Devon Trust will accept sex offenders who say they are women into women's wards if they have taken anti-libidinal medication, so to reduce their sex drive, that would be expected to reduce sexual risk. What do they mean by expect, and on what evidence? When they say reduce by how much? From rape to voyeurism, or from 3 to 2 offences? The aim of safeguarding is to eliminate risk, not merely reduce it. And Oxford NHS Trust place the burden of preventing sexual assault similarly on staff in this new soft boundaried world they have made. Yet we, the staff, were not consulted. And most of us still have no idea. The overwhelming majority of sexual predators are men, 99% in the UK, as analysed by Claire Dimian last year. She found that victims were 88% women. Statistics further show that of the population of trans-identified male prisoners, over 60% were sex offenders in 2021, compared to 18% of men. So are men committing offences and then identifying out of their sex after arrest? That is a documented reality. Or are trans-identified men more likely to be sex offenders? One of these must be true, and I believe both of them are. So what have I done over the last year while I've been too angry to sit down and ignore it? Well, I was involved in some meetings with NHSE and Department of Health with Baroness Nicholson, but this political route has not been successful so far. I'm now working within my own hospital trust to challenge and change policy, I hope. Fortunately, I found myself in the same room as the CEO, chief nurse, medical director, and HR a few weeks ago, and they agreed to let me carry out an equality impact assessment on Annex B with their help, as a neighbouring trust have successfully done. So this trust have successfully removed Annex B. They've written their own trans policy because they found that it negatively impacted almost every single protected characteristic. Now, the second and third shocks I received last year are related to same-sex care. In October, I saw the extreme reach of this ideology in action in healthcare. My friend Teresa Steele was awaiting an imminent major bowel operation for a rare condition requiring 2 specialist surgeons and a robotic suite. Just after a pre-op assessment during which she had been undressed, a trans-identified male nurse opened the door into her assessment area and made fixed eye contact with her. There was no apology for breaching her privacy. She formally complained about the privacy breach and requested same-sex care, as she did not want to be treated by male staff dressed as female and identifying as female, explaining that she did not believe in gender and would not engage in any manifestation of gender ideology. For this, the chief executive cancelled her operation with 1 working day's notice in a cruel act of revenge, with a severe impact on her outcome. The email she received explained that the hospital did not share her views, had to protect staff from harassment, and they could not accommodate her request, told her to make alternative arrangements. The details of this, including all the email correspondence, can be read on Twitter as a thread by Ripex for Nutmeg. But in reality, of course, sharing views and putting the demands of staff above the needs and wishes of patients is a dystopian nightmare come true. We don't share the views of all our patients. How could we? They are irrelevant. My views are irrelevant to my patients. To exemplify that, we once cared for a serving prisoner after stroke who had 2 officers present at all times, and he was chained to one all the time. He received excellent care, and we built a very good rapport with him. His crime was inadvertently disclosed to us by one of the officers. We had not sought it, and the crime was paedophilia. I am proud to say that our care and rapport continued as before. Our professionalism achieved this. We did not share his beliefs, but his beliefs and his previous crimes were irrelevant to the fulfillment of our professional duty. Same-sex care is not difficult. Sometimes men prefer male carers, and we oblige, of course. None of us women are offended. We're only concerned that the patient thrives. The Health and Care Act, as I mentioned, states that we must provide enough staffing, that each should be appropriate for the job. So for a hospital to state that there are not enough women to provide same-sex care for women cannot be defended. Most carers are women. If you need more, pay more, employ more. It has gradually dawned on me since that same-sex care is another fundamental right that has been given away, and this is the third shock. When I finally read the details of Annex B that evening last March, I didn't feel anger then, I felt shame. This was a betrayal of women, the most vulnerable women in our society. And the bodies of 3 women in one bay where I had been working that day flooded my mind. Anna, a 21-year-old student whose spinal bleed had caused quadriplegia. She could speak, but she couldn't press the call bell. She couldn't control her body temperature and needed to wear very light clothing. She was Muslim. Her parents were too far away to visit. Her partner had ended their relationship with her admission, so she was homeless and had no visitors. She had very painful periods. Physically and psychologically, she had a very difficult journey ahead. She had the right to privacy, consent, choice, the dignity of a same-sex environment, and she chose same-sex care too. Language throughout healthcare has been changed to prefer gender over sex. So parents of profoundly disabled children are no longer able to vouchsafe same-sex care for them. This week, a disabled woman, Henrietta Freeman, who has consented to me relating to this story, has been abused on Twitter for her defense of same-sex care for herself and all disabled people who choose it. Who has attacked her? Trans-identified men, in particular Frida Wallace, who works in an NHS trust in patient transport. He posts photos of himself in BDSM poses and in the bath, referring to his genitals as the crown jewels. He condemns Henrietta's position as inherently wicked, offensive, and dangerous to trans ID men, and warns others that she is a danger to trans people. She simply states that she wishes to exclude men from giving her care. It's nothing to do with transness. Her disabilities are severe. She's paralyzed from the shoulders down with arm weakness, and she is nonverbal. She is most certainly the vulnerable party in a care situation. The key to enter her home is kept in a key box outside for the care agency to use. This care agency refused to guarantee all women care. In what world can this be possible? You cannot guarantee that the person evacuating my bowel, changing my tampon, washing my private parts is not a woman. This should be the easiest promise to uphold. What kind of men would fight for the opportunity to touch women's bodies against their consent? I tweeted legislation that I've mentioned here in support of Henrietta's position. And from his sock account, Frida tweeted me, informing me that he knows where I work, and he does. Someone has contacted him, evidently, who recognizes the window of the hospital pool, which I'd posted a picture of. What kind of man reaches out to a woman defending legally protected choices in healthcare to tell her he knows where she is, that he works in the same building? It is the kind of man who feels entitled to violate this women's space. who exert power over her, to shut her up and erase her autonomy. I believe these men are sociopaths, unable to feel empathy, like those convicted recently from Welton Hall, the wrong people to have in healthcare. Frida has been suspended from this NHS job, and his supporters and he demonstrate why we cannot allow men to lie about sex and direct our care. Consent, like sex, is immutable in law. How on earth did consent fall victim to gender ideology? We will defend the rights and boundaries of our patients and strive for patient-centred care as we always have, and we must strengthen them into the future so that they never again become disposed of in the face of a malignant ideology. Thank you very much for listening.
We're going to now watch a video that was made by Fabiola from Venezuela, and it's called "The Silence Around the Deaths of Women and Children in Venezuela."
En Venezuela se registraron 37 feminicidios de niñas en el 2022, según un balance anual del Centro de Justicia y Paz, CEPAZ, en el que se contabilizaron un total de 282 asesinatos de mujeres de todas las edades a manos de feminicidas durante el año pasado.
Hola, mi nombre es Fabiola Hernández. Agradezco esta oportunidad. Actualmente vivo en el estado de Aragua, Venezuela. Soy sobreviviente de violencia y lejos de avergonzarme, me ha fortalecido para así poder, desde mi experiencia, entender y ayudar a otras mujeres víctimas de violencia en sus distintos tipos: física, verbal, psicológica, laboral, sexual y social. Es por eso que siempre vivo en búsqueda de conocimiento que me nutra y sirva para poner en práctica. Por ello estoy acá. Actualmente en Venezuela hay muchos casos de violencia que entran en estadísticas por ser denunciados, pero otro tanto son un grueso que no es denunciado, bien sea por miedo, por disfuncionalidad o por complicidad. Los recientes casos de la burundanga, su modus operandi es repartir volantes con alguna supuesta promoción publicitaria o dejar estos papeles impregnados de escopolamina o burundanga en las manillas de los vehículos o los espejos del conductor, en estaciones del metro o estacionamientos, con la posterior finalidad de despojarles de sus pertenencias o, en el caso de algunas mujeres, agredirles sexualmente. También ocurre con frecuencia conocer a otras personas en redes sociales para posteriormente citarse y conocerse, o en fiestas donde se separen de sus grupos de amigas o amigos, y al llegar al contacto físico con estos individuos, si la mujer no accede, entonces se sienten frustrados y proceden a cegarles hasta la vida. Acá en el país no hay cifras oficiales, ya que al parecer no es una prioridad para el Estado. Por tanto, me he tenido que documentar y basar en páginas web internacionales, que considero son un aproximado. Pero lo que sí les aseguro es que los casos se han incrementado a niveles espantosos. Hay una falta enorme de educación a nivel cultural, general, sexual y preventiva, producto de los antivalores ejemplarizados desde este sistema de gobierno, desencadenando se vean reflejados en el poco respeto hacia el pueblo al que se debe y dentro de la sociedad. La poca empatía frente a muchas situaciones en la población más vulnerable que existe en las barriadas, dando paso a la desvalorización y cosificación de la mujer. Entre los jóvenes, los géneros musicales y en la hipersexualización de la vestimenta de algunas niñas y el imitar comportamientos de algunos adultos, derivando así en una gran descomposición social. El nivel cultural va en detrimento, ya que los estándares educativos han bajado muchísimo y los valores y principios desde el hogar, en su mayoría, han sido consecuencia de la falta de culturización y educación, sin contar que nuestros profesores y maestros encargados de la formación de nuestros jóvenes son los peores pagados. Todo esto aunado a décadas de una cultura machista, donde aún persiste la creencia inculcada a las niñas que su rol en la vida primordialmente es dar a luz y cuidar de sus hijos, sin mencionar que sus ilusiones deben reposar sobre el hecho de que deben de conseguir una pareja que les mantenga económicamente, cuando la realidad es que todos los roles deben de ser compartidos en un esquema de corresponsabilidad, equidad e igualdad, ya que parte importante de la democracia debe ser la reivindicación de los derechos fundamentales de la mujer, a su educación, salud física, mental, sexual y a su preparación, empoderamiento y profesionalización, así como el respeto a su participación en los distintos ámbitos de la sociedad. Y también el respeto a decidir sobre su cuerpo sin ser penalizado bajo el manejo consciente de sus actos y consecuencias para sí misma. La economía ha generado mucha dependencia de tipo económica y emocional por parte de muchas mujeres de nuestro país, las cuales soportan hechos de humillación, maltrato psicológico desmoralizante, aguantando muchas veces por su sustento y el de sus hijos, generando patrones de conducta, los cuales posteriormente son imitados y adoptados en sus comportamientos por parte de los infantes y jóvenes que van creciendo de generación en generación. Esto ha traído como consecuencia hechos muy comunes como prohibirles a sus parejas cómo vestir o trabajar por el hecho de compartir espacio con otros hombres y hasta el vigilar el uso de sus teléfonos móviles por creerse con el derecho. Incluso aún se leen y se escuchan comentarios en redes sociales donde se responsabiliza a las mujeres que han sufrido de violencia sexual por su manera de vestir, indicando que ellas provocaron la situación, algo totalmente retrógrado e inaceptable desde ningún punto de vista. El levantamiento de datos aquí presentado se realizó analizando la muerte de mujeres con base en instrumentos y estándares de carácter internacional, ya que en Venezuela no se dispone de cifras oficiales ni de registros individualizados de los últimos años sobre la comisión de crímenes contra mujeres, ni tampoco contra los derechos humanos. Esto ha limitado la información pública disponible sobre el tema, lo que impide un efectivo acceso a la información de organismos relevantes. En la página de COFAVIC, el artículo La ausencia de detalles dice lo siguiente: las cifras aportadas por el Ministerio Público reflejan el número de casos atendidos y casos resueltos, pero no especifica el número de medidas de reparación o de protección dictadas a favor de las víctimas. Tampoco el tipo de violencia, si se penalizó a los agresores o se reparó a las víctimas. Tampoco publica en ningún sitio web oficial ni en informes anuales un registro nacional de denuncias de casos de violencia contra la mujer, ni de afectación diferenciada de género en caso de desaparición forzadas, ejecuciones extrajudiciales y torturas, tratos crueles, inhumanos y degradantes. Fin de la cita. Al cierre del año 2022, el Observatorio Digital de Feminicidios del Centro de Justicia y Paz, CEPAS, documentó 282 casos de feminicidios consumados en Venezuela y 120 casos de feminicidios frustrados. Hubo un promedio de una acción feminicida cada 26 horas. De esta cifra de 282 feminicidios, 37 casos corresponden a niñas, que junto a las mujeres entre 70 a 85 años, 14 casos, constituyen los grupos etarios más vulnerables. Cada 9 días murió una niña por feminicidio en Venezuela en el año 2022. De los 37 casos documentados, 8 murieron por abuso sexual y 11 niñas murieron por violencia física. 22 de las niñas tenían menos de 5 años. El informe del Observatorio Digital de Feminicidios recopiló datos de los medios de comunicación digitales, ya que cuando un Estado no publica cifras estadísticas oficiales, los hechos descritos en los portales de noticias se convierten en una importante fuente para monitorear la situación social. El 22 de los casos ocurrieron en el Distrito Capital, el 16.7 ocurrió en el estado Zulia, el 11.1 en el estado Miranda y el otro 11.1% en el estado Carabobo. Fin de la cita. Un gran número de jóvenes ha desertado de las aulas de clases y poseen poca preparación a nivel cultural, moral y educativo, que suelen ver más atractivo ser la novia de un delincuente a prepararse para ser una mujer completamente independiente y empoderada. Lejos de evolucionar como sociedad, todo esto ha traído como consecuencia antivalores, este conglomerado de malas decisiones y gestiones sociales sin preparación ni supervisión por parte del gobierno en las zonas más vulnerables. En la actualidad, contamos con un grupo de jóvenes y mujeres haciendo vida en la Fundación, por lo que trabajamos multidisciplinariamente, dentro de las bases de la educación, la igualdad, la consideración, el respeto y sobre todo el rescate de valores y principios fundamentales del ser humano. Estamos elaborando proyectos y material audiovisual que incluya cada vez más jóvenes y mujeres que se sumen a construir una gran red de ayuda y de prevención, educándoles contra el maltrato y la violencia hacia nuestro entorno y primordialmente nuestros niñas, niños y mujeres, impulsando su crecimiento, fortaleciendo sus bases desde la educación, la conciencia y el amor dentro de nuestra sociedad. Queremos producir cambios y transformación desde cada uno de nosotros, los que somos los mensajeros de esta misión, para así poder dar ejemplos que produzcan frutos a futuro como mejores seres humanos. Es necesario entender la acción transformadora de la mujer dentro de la sociedad, sensibilizando pensamientos erróneos y críticos para con el entorno donde nos desenvolvemos y para con el ambiente, con la finalidad de mejorar el pedacito de planeta que habitamos desde cualquier rol y que sea sustentable en el tiempo. En el ámbito político somos atacadas e invisibilizadas por hombres que han sido formados dentro del patriarcado machista. Nuestra intención no es la de luchar contra ellos, sino a su lado, hombro a hombro, para complementarnos en nuestra idea transformadora y de generar. Es imperativo el rescate de las nuevas generaciones para un reconocimiento y un despertar de conciencia, para la sustentabilidad y la repercusión de manera positiva en nuestro hábitat y por ende en nuestro planeta. La mujer venezolana fuera de nuestras fronteras ha sido resiliente, aguerrida, empoderada, para así poder ayudar a su familia, de la cual por muchas razones debió separarse, dejándoles en su país natal, y así poder contribuir a mejorar condiciones de vida de sus familiares de alguna manera. Son modelos ejemplarizantes como el de Natalie Quintero, ingeniera aeroespacial, quien su rol consistió en supervisar y liderar el equipo de operaciones del Core Stage 1, pieza central del cohete Space Launch System. Merimer Bejarano, quien asumió la responsabilidad como un desafío en la dirección del Hospital San Vicente de Tahuatahua en Chile, país al cual llegó en el 2018. Yulimar Rojas, medallista olímpica y récord mundial de triple salto, recientemente nombrada mejor atleta de España. Acá en Venezuela, como tantas otras valiosas venezolanas, retando un oficio que tradicionalmente lleva el sello de cosas de hombres, abriéndose paso entre obstáculos, prejuicios e inseguridades, Alejandra Wetter. La curiosidad y su pasión la llevaron a ser la mujer mecánica automotriz especializada en el modelo Ford Mustang. Existen muchos talentos dentro de nuestra tierra y nuestra meta es formar y fortalecer mujeres empoderadas, capaces de elevar su voz y así hacer valer sus derechos y poder defenderlos ante cualquier instancia, dentro y fuera de nuestras fronteras, dejando un legado enorme de trabajo, responsabilidad, constancia, fortaleza, conocimiento y amor por lo que hacen. Nuestra meta es crear espacios de pluralidad, donde todos podamos coexistir y compartir. Si tienen alguna inquietud o pregunta, háganmela saber. Gracias por escucharme.